Welcome to the debate. Today we're looking at a really fascinating new microeconomic analysis from BCG. It suggests this incoming paradox. Basically, AI is going to fundamentally reshape up to 55% of all US jobs in just the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, and I mean, the numbers are just staggering. We're talking about a study of 165 million US jobs across, I think, 1,500 distinct roles.
Exactly. We really want to understand exactly how generative AI is going to interact with the labor market. And, the real threat hidden in this data might not be immediate mass unemployment. It might actually be the complete silent disappearance of the entry-level job.
Right, because beyond that 55% reshaping figure, in the longer term, say, 5 years out, this analysis projects we could see 10 to 15% of jobs eliminated entirely.
Why we need to dig into the actual mechanics of this report. Because my position today is that AI is acting primarily as a catalyst for unprecedented human augmentation.
Okay, augmentation.
Yes, if you look closely at the economic principle of demand expandability, the data actually shows that productivity gains are going to unlock just massive new market needs. We are going to elevate the workforce, not erase it.
Well, I look at this exact same data, and I see a fundamental, frankly dangerous, hollowing out of the labor market.
Dangerous?
Yeah, absolutely. The structural substitution of repeatable workflows is going to sever the traditional career ladder. I mean, by automating the execution phase of work, we are looking at the permanent elimination of the vital junior positions that have historically built our human capital.
Look, let's start with what I see as the fundamental economic fallacy driving so much of the panic right now. It's this equation of task automation with job loss.
Because they usually go hand in hand.
But they simply are not the same thing. Yes, the BCG report notes that 43% of jobs exceed the 40% automation threshold.
Right.
Which is the point where redesigning a role actually makes business sense. But the dominant force in the data isn't substitution. It is reshaping. A task goes to the machine, but the role expands for the human.
You're relying really heavily on the idea that reshaping inherently keeps the human in the center of the economic equation.
Because it does.
But reshaping can just as easily mean shrinking a 5-person team down to a 1-person team.
Not if demand expands. And this brings us to the Jevons paradox, which is absolutely central to understanding the economics of this material.
Ah, the coal analogy.
It works. Back in the 19th century, William Stanley Jevons noticed that when the steam engine became more efficient at using coal consumption didn't drop. It actually skyrocketed.
Right, because things got cheaper.
Exactly. Cheaper energy meant we could use steam engines for far more things. And the exact same mechanism applies to human labor and cognitive output. As AI lowers the cost of producing an outcome, total demand expands.
I'm not so sure about that.
Well, think about it. If we can write code faster, we don't fire half the software engineers. We build twice as much software. AI is the lever, but the human is still the one pulling it.
Hold on, I have to challenge that premise directly. The Jevons paradox applies to coal and steam engines. We're talking about human cognition here.
The economics are the same.
You can't just copy-paste 19th century thermodynamics onto a 21st century knowledge worker. Coal doesn't experience burnout. Coal doesn't require a 10-year onboarding process to understand the strategic context of a business.
But the economic mechanism of demand still holds true. Cheaper supply of a valuable good leads to increased consumption of that good.
Only if the demand is infinite, which it rarely is. But look, even if we assume demand expands, you are glossing over what happens to roles that rely on structured, repeatable processes.
How so?
You are talking about elevating workers. But what happens when the core tasks of a role face direct labor substitution?
Okay, well, we need to ground these theoretical economic models in the real differences between tasks requiring human judgment versus those relying on repeatable processes. Let's look at software engineering.
The classic battlefield for this debate right now, precisely because it is so vulnerable.
Vulnerable at the task level, absolutely. But the report specifically categorizes this as an amplified role, making up about 5% of the job market. This is a perfect example of why the data points to augmentation.
I mean, if you just look at the code generation.
Coding itself includes highly routine elements, sure, generating boilerplate, running basic unit tests, formatting. AI handles that brilliantly. But the core value of a software engineer isn't just typing lines of code.
It's the design.
Right. It is system design. It is architectural judgment. Think about the trade-offs an engineer makes daily between, system latency, server cost, data security.
Yeah, but AI is getting better at that too.
It accelerates the code generation, essentially acting as an incredibly powerful compiler. But it cannot replace the system-level judgment required to own the outcome end-to-end. The workflow can't be cleanly bifurcated. You don't replace the engineer simply operates at a much higher level of abstraction.
I'm sorry, but that is a static snapshot of AI capabilities projected into a highly dynamic future. The report itself includes a very explicit caveat about frontier models.
But we have to deal with the data we have today.
And the trajectory we're on. You are arguing that the AI handles the routine coding while the human does the architectural design. You are describing a cognitive assembly line where the AI works the belt and the human manages the factory floor.
Which is a huge elevation for the human.
But what happens when the machine learns to design the factory?
You're assuming an advancement in AI that perfectly mimics higher-order human integration. That's a massive leap from where we currently are.
Is it? I mean, I am looking at the trajectory of the frontier labs, which are obsessively focused on agentic, multi-step reasoning domains right now.
They're trying, yes.
And if newer AI models master system-level trade-offs, integration across complex systems, and architectural judgment, the very things you say protect the engineer, then software engineering doesn't stay in the amplified category. It shifts entirely into the divergent category.
And even in the urgent category, the role still exists.
Yes, but look at how it exists. In a divergent model, the AI substitutes for human tasks, and demand expands, sure, but the labor pool required to meet that demand radically shrinks.
I think you're overstating the shrinkage.
I don't think so. A tiny fraction of highly senior, deeply knowledgeable engineering leaders produce almost all the output, using fleets of autonomous AI agents. The vast middle tier of developers is completely substituted out. You don't need 1,000 engineers augmented by AI. You need 10 architects orchestrating autonomous agents.
But that limitation only exists if you assume the amount of software the world wants is a fixed pie. And it isn't. The number of IT roadmaps sitting in enterprise backlogs is nearly infinite.
That's a strong claim.
If you have 10 architects doing the work of 1,000, software becomes so cheap to produce that every small business on Earth gets bespoke enterprise-grade software. Let's look at a different divergent role to illustrate how expandable demand actually saves the worker. Take insurance sales agents.
Oh, a role where junior positions are highly exposed to automation?
Exposed to task automation, yes, but look at the mechanism of expandable demand here. What does a junior agent actually do?
Lead qualification, quote generation.
Exactly. Basic policy comparisons. AI automates that routine work. When you automate that, you drastically lower the cost of distribution for the insurance company.
Right.
Now, does the company just fire the junior agents and keep their client base exactly the same? No. Lower distribution costs allow them to profitably reach previously underserved markets.
Like what?
But underinsured small businesses or complex life insurance portfolios that were previously just too expensive to service. The market expands. The routine sales job transitions into a high-value advisory role. We aren't destroying the job. We are transitioning the human to focus on complex products and long-term client relationships.
But you are cherry-picking an industry where latent demand is essentially infinite.
I wouldn't call it cherry-picking.
It is, though. A business can always buy more insurance coverage or better software. Let's look at the 12% of jobs in the substituted category, specifically call center representatives and financial analysts. The dynamic here is fundamentally different because demand is bounded.
Bounded by what, exactly? Why can't a company consume more financial analysis?
Because demand for financial reporting is capped by executive bandwidth and reporting cycles. The board of directors only meets once a quarter. The C-suite can only digest so much data to make a decision.
They could always use more real-time data.
Take a financial analyst. The volume of financial analysis a company needs is tied to internal decision-making processes. If AI aggregates the data, runs the variance analysis, and generates the initial interpretation in 10 minutes instead of 10 days, the company does not suddenly need double the financial models. They don't want 400 variance analyses. They want one accurate one.
Okay, but couldn't a company use that freed up analyst time to run deeper, real-time predictive modeling instead of just looking backward at historical data?
To a degree, yes, but not at the volume required to maintain current headcount. You run into the law of diminishing marginal returns pretty quickly.
So you think headcount definitely drops?
Absolutely. In bounded demand scenarios, productivity directly equals headcount reduction. The exact same mechanism applies to the call center. The volume of inbound calls is dictated by how many customers you have and how often your product breaks.
Fair point on the call volume.
If an agentic AI system can reliably handle account lookups, policy explanations, and troubleshooting end-to-end, you simply require fewer human representatives, period. In these domains, efficiency gains convert directly into net job losses and massive downward wage pressure for the positions that do remain.
I see the logic there, but it treats the labor market as a set of isolated static silos.
How so?
Yes, a highly specific, substituted role like a routine data aggregator might see a headcount reduction. But the BCG report is clear that substitution at the role level does not imply permanent exclusion from the macro workforce.
Ah, the macroeconomic view.
Right. As efficiency lowers costs, capital is freed up, other sectors grow, and workers transition, especially into the 34% of roles categorized as limited exposure. Those are the jobs relying heavily on emotional intelligence, physical presence, and deep human context.
Transitioning sounds seamless in macroeconomic theory, but in reality,
It brings us to the most critical systemic risk identified in this entire analysis. It is the core anxiety every executive is whispering about right now, the destruction of the entry level and the hollowing out of the organizational talent pipeline.
you're talking about the friction of moving from junior to senior roles within an organization. No, I'm talking about the outright impossibility of it. Let's connect this back to your software engineer and insurance agent examples. You can see that AI takes over the initial financial modeling, the standard code generation, the basic lead qualification.
Yes, the execution phase.
Right. But how do you think a senior architect learns system design? How does a senior insurance advisor develop the contextual judgment to handle a complex small business portfolio?
They learn on the job.
They learn it by spending 5 years doing the execution-focused work. They learn the edge cases by grinding through the routine tasks.
They learn the what to eventually understand the why.
Exactly. If the execution phase is fully automated, the training ground vanishes. How do workers gain contextual judgment if the machine does all the context building? You cannot synthesize higher-order strategy if you've never been in the weeds.
Look, that is a very real friction, and I totally acknowledge that organizational design is going to have to adapt radically. But I don't believe the training ground vanishes. I believe it fundamentally evolves.
Evolves into what?
Look at the data on rebalanced roles, which make up 14% of jobs, and enabled roles, which make up 23%. Let's use content marketing as an example of a rebalanced role.
Another sector where demand is largely bounded by marketing budgets, I'd point out.
The budget might be bounded, but the complexity of the landscape is just exploding. Audience fragmentation, micro-influencers, highly dynamic algorithmic customer journeys. AI automates the repetitive drafting and channel-specific formatting.
So the junior marketer is out of a job?
No, so what happens to the junior marketer? They don't disappear. The role expands. They become omni-channel strategists. The new training ground isn't grinding out 50 variations of a Facebook ad manually. It is learning to orchestrate an AI to test 5,000 variations and then interpreting the strategic intent behind the data.
You are proving my exact point. How does a junior marketer know what strategic intent looks like if they've never written a single successful ad themselves?
They learn through iteration, faster iteration.
You are asking a 22-year-old recent graduate to step into a role that traditionally requires a decade of market intuition. They are handed an AI orchestration suite on day one and expected to perform at the level of a senior strategist. The skill threshold just skyrocketed. We are creating an impossibly high credentialing ceiling here.
Yes, the baseline expectation rises, but the tools to meet that threshold are democratized. AI fluency is going to replace tenure as the new barrier to entry.
It's not just fluency, though.
But it is. We are going to see junior candidates who master AI orchestration leapfrog traditional hierarchies. They won't need 5 years of execution grunt work because the AI provides the baseline execution. It allows them to iterate and learn strategy 10 times faster.
AI isn't just a tool, it's a tenure collapser. And you are completely ignoring the biological and psychological costs of that collapse. The report explicitly warns about rising cognitive load.
Cognitive load is a factor, yes.
As a refractory period.
You're saying the drudgery was a break.
It's biologically necessary downtime. If you automate all the routine tasks, the remaining work is 100% concentrated on problem solving, exception handling, and high-level strategic integration.
So you're saying the density of the workday becomes overwhelming.
Exactly. If you remove the formatting and the basic data entry, you are demanding 8 continuous hours of high-level strategic synthesis. The human brain literally cannot sustain that. You are asking junior employees to maintain a state of continuous, intense cognitive engagement. Many workers will simply burn out, or they'll just fail to cross that new credentialing ceiling entirely.
I see why you emphasize the risk of burnout. But let's reframe how cognitive load actually manifests when applied correctly. The removal of drudgery doesn't necessarily mean a descent into an 8-hour strategic pressure cooker. It can mean an elevation into purpose.
Purpose?
Yes. Let's look at the enabled category in the BCG data. Take a clinical assistant in a healthcare setting.
Healthcare is unique because physical presence is mandatory.
It is, but the mechanism of enablement applies broadly. When a clinical assistant uses an ambient AI system for real-time patient note-taking, insurance coding, and diagnostic flagging, the drudgery is removed.
Okay.
But they aren't suffering from increased cognitive load. They are free to focus on the human being sitting in front of them, the emotional intelligence, the empathy, the complex interpersonal judgment. Those become the premium skills.
I don't disagree on the healthcare front.
Right. In fact, the report notes that 34% of jobs are limited exposure precisely because they require deeply human, highly contextual interactions that AI simply cannot codify. The cognitive load shifts from data processing to human connection.
Look, I agree that limited exposure roles like physicians, nurses, and specialized teachers are insulated. And yes, their emotional bandwidth increases when administrative burden drops. But that is only 34% of the workforce.
That's a third of the workforce.
But for the vast majority of the corporate workforce, the 50 to 55% facing immediate reshaping in offices and knowledge sectors, human connection is not the primary output. Strategic synthesis is. And for them, the lag between automation potential and realized impact is masking a very painful structural shift.
What exactly do you mean by masking?
I mean that right now, we are in the augmentation honeymoon phase. Full structural substitution rolls out much slower than augmentation because substitution requires massive process redesign.
True, redesign takes time.
It requires mapping and formalizing all the tacit knowledge that humans hold in their heads. Right now, companies are just giving workers AI tools to use as, super interns. That's augmentation. But as enterprise integration scales up, and companies fundamentally redesign their workflows from the ground up around autonomous AI agents, the human in the loop becomes an unnecessary expense in those bounded demand sectors.
I think that's too pessimistic.
The data projects 10 to 15% job elimination, but that rosy number heavily relies on the macroeconomic assumption that those displaced workers will be smoothly absorbed elsewhere. If the new roles require impossible strategic foresight on day one and the cognitive load is unbearable, they won't be smoothly absorbed. They will just be left behind.
Well, that brings us to a crucial point of convergence, I think. Both of our readings of this data point to the absolute necessity of institutional adaptation. Workforce strategy can no longer be a reactive HR function sitting downstream of technological implementation.
Absolutely. If a CEO simply buys enterprise AI licenses, hands them to the staff, and expects productivity to magically sort itself out, they are going to shatter their own internal talent pipelines. They will wake up in 3 years with no mid-level managers who actually understand the business.
Right. Massive, continuous upskilling has to be embedded directly into the core corporate strategy. If we want to realize the massive positive reshaping that I see in this data, where human judgment, System orchestration and emotional intelligence become the ultimate premium skills. We have to intentionally design career pathways that teach those skills in an AI-mediated environment. We have to figure out how to teach the why when the machine is doing the what.
And yet, we remain fundamentally divided on the ultimate outcome of that transition. You see a future where AI fluency democratizes productivity, allowing junior talent to leapfrog legacy structures and massively expand total economic output.
I do.
I see a future where this transition structurally fractures the labor market, permanently severing the entry-level rungs of the career ladder and leaving a massive segment of the workforce stranded below an impossibly high credentialing ceiling.
It is a profound tension, no doubt. Understanding the nuances between a specific task being automated, a broader role being reshaped, and a human worker actually being replaced is incredibly complex. The microeconomic framework provided by this BCG analysis offers a vital map for the territory ahead.
A map we all need to study.
Exactly. But how organizations choose to navigate that terrain, whether they use AI to build ruthless cognitive assembly lines or to empower human architects, will ultimately determine the shape of our economic future. It's a critical moment for the labor market, and one we encourage everyone to explore deeply through the source data to form their own conclusions. Thanks for listening.